Hello to everybody, so hopefully that's okay with everybody. So first of all, thank you to Advanced Leadership Foundation for inviting us here. It's an honor, and especially it's an honor because of the quality of the opponents, but also the quality of all of you guys who are here. I think you are the guys who need to make the circular economy moving, so I want to give a big applause to you guys, so please give yourself a big applause. So actually, I'm going to be honest, I've been asked to moderate this panel 10 minutes ago, so I'm going to do my best, all right? So the way we're going to do it, I'm going to give a brief introduction about myself, and then each one of them will do the same, and then we're going to start a conversation. Just in 4 minutes, my background, I'm an ex-investment banker, working Morgan Stanley in London on M&A for 3 years. If you want, I work on the evil side, so nothing to do with the circle economy, quite the opposite, actually. But I did that for 3 years, then I quit, and after that, what I did is create a company, a startup, called Ticketbis here in Spain. Started in 2010, sold it in 2016 to eBay. It was a very good exit for us. We owned more than 50% of the company, so after that, I decided to keep investing with my partner. We created a family office, and of that family office, we have done several things. One of them is actually we are creating a fund. It's a 100 million fund to invest in venture capital. We invest in Spain, but also we're investing in the US and Latin America, so it's a little bit global fund. And that I'm doing it aside that actually I was telling my colleagues here that I was supposed to remain in eBay for 3 years after the sales, but actually today I signed and actually I'm liberated from eBay, so I'm not going to be able to dedicate 100% of my time to this, so I'm very excited about that. That's a bit of my background. So please, Pierre.
My name is Pierre Stein. I'm with the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank. I started my career there about 22 years ago in Mongolia. And I started with a view to the circular economy because one of my first projects was actually to see how can you put solar panels on rooftops, or more precisely on tent tops, on yurts, because there was a lot of demand for electricity out there in the off-grid space. But back then, that was not profitable. Now it cost you about $10 per watt peak to do that, whereas today it's now about 30, 40 cents, right? So it changed quite a lot in those 22 years. And I think we'll talk a little bit about it, what that opportunity looks like today.
Yep.
Yo soy Diego Fernández Elices, director general de inversiones de AIG Banca Privada, y nos dedicamos a gestionar patrimonios financieros y no solo financieros de clientes y gestionar algunos fondos de inversión. Bueno, venimos aquí yo creo a dar un poco la visión de cómo se está creando un círculo virtuoso en esto de la inversión socialmente responsable y cómo es desde luego una demanda cada vez más habitual por parte de los clientes y cómo parece que esto pues empieza a ir en serio. Y como dicen los ingleses, y me acabo de dar cuenta que he empezado a hablar en español en vez de en inglés. Sorry for that. People are starting to put their money where their mouth was.
All right. Cool. So let me start with one question. So we've been talking about circular economy, right? But in order to make this real, you need actually investors who are backing this up. So how do you think investors are facing the circular economy? Do they think it's a reality now? So how you guys perceive this from your point of view? I would say more from the institutional point of view and from a corporate point of view. So what do you think is going on? Pierre, you want to start?
Sure. So we have tried to assess that market and the opportunity, the investment opportunity in emerging markets. And we looked at the 21 largest markets because really emerging markets will drive a lot of the opportunity for the green economy going forward. And we believe that there's at least $23 trillion of investment opportunity between now and 2030.
Wow.
About $16 trillion in green buildings, another 3.7 in transportation, 1.8 in renewables. And all of this will require a lot of investments, right? And the key question really is, where does this investment come from, right? It's not going to be the public sector. And we believe that the only way that this will happen is if the banks really participate and provide that financing, right? And the key issue that we see is we believe they are ready, they are willing, and they're interested, right? I mean, ready, there's $50 trillion in banking assets in emerging markets. We estimate that by 2030, about a third of the loan portfolios will have to be green in order to finance that opportunity. That's a huge jump from where they are today. We believe probably no more than 7% where they are today, but the assets are there, right? We believe that they are willing because, if you look at the global banks, about 50% of all global banks already offer products in the space, and that links back to a survey that we did with Latin American banks, also 70%. It's a little bit higher for IFC's clients. Maybe we have a selection bias here, it's at 70% there, but they're definitely already in the space and engaging, right? And we also believe that they're interested, right? Because 90% of all the Latin American banks that are not yet in the space said that they want to enter the space, right? So definitely ready, willing, and interested.
Okay.
And I chose my words carefully. I didn't say quite yet able. I do believe that they still need a little bit of support, but we can talk about that.
Totally.
From the private investor point of view, we probably faced the important point of this story. So there was the feel-good factor, which everyone had. Everyone wanted to invest in this, but no one was willing to pay for it. So I think that we now have far detailed information, and now we clearly can state that it will not be always, but it is profitable to invest this way. Now, I mean, I personally think that we definitely can state that it is not costly to invest this way. At least you should have the same performance, but you may even do better in the long run. And that's almost accepted. I would say not necessarily accepted 100%. It's a mentality change. It may be a multi-generational thing, but people know that it's not going to cost money. So if it's not going to cost money and we can do good things, the feel-good factor really fits now.
Totally. So it's interesting what you're saying. So how you guys think the mentality has evolved from investor, right? Because we're saying 10, 15 years ago, everybody say, oh, green economy, great, but it's not really willing to put money. So how the mentality can change? And is it because now there is real return investing in this? What is your perspective on this?
But I mean, I typically don't like the word tipping point that much, right? I would rather think about it as a diving board, right? Those of you who have kids, we both have kids. When you remember your kids on the diving board, their first jump, right? There's the abyss right in front of you. You have to jump. You've seen, luckily, some other kids who have done it and who've survived it, right? So it's good to see some others. And in particular for banks, right? They typically don't like to be first movers, right?
Of course. You have venture capital for that. So
it's good to see good examples there. But I think it really, for this to take off, right? And for banks to take a role in this, right? It is really a commitment, and it really requires a jump, right? And we can help with this, right? I think banks do need support, right? I mean, there's a lot of expertise that's needed to actually implement that in a bank, right? There's a commitment from shareholders, from management, staff that have to engage, and you have to find the right products and services, how you engage your clients. But it also requires support from the regulator and the policymakers, right? Because banks are highly regulated, right? So if you can frame it within that perspective about what are the risks and what are the opportunities, that certainly helps. And the third is that the majority of this funding will require long-term investments. And so the banks will not be able to do this without capital markets. If they can't go back, refinance themselves through green bonds, if they cannot go back through securitization of those assets, if they cannot crowd in institutional and private investors, it will be very difficult for them to do that.
So what is exactly the World Bank doing in order to help those banks? Because you're right. I mean, you need the local banks. It cannot be done by a supranational. You need the local banks to really push into it when we're talking about such a big investment. Right. So what specifically is the World Bank doing in that sense?
Yeah. So we work on all those three elements. So we have about 750 banks and financial institutions we work with in emerging markets. We provide financing and expertise to those banks to develop this. We've done this with about 200 financial institutions around the world, and we've seen that it's gaining momentum now over the last 3 years. We're currently quadrupling our business in the space, and it's definitely taking on. We're working with regulators and policymakers. We have a network, the Sustainable Banking Network, that brings together regulators and policymakers and banking associations from 35 emerging markets. They account for about 85% of total banking assets in emerging markets. So it's pretty meaningful as a driver. And then we are setting up vehicles to crowd in institutional investors. We've just set up the world's largest green bond fund with Amundi, which now is bringing in about $1.4 billion of institutional investors from developed markets to invest in emerging markets into this opportunity.
Right, deal.
For the pure investment point of view, is probably the big thing is the access to capital.
Yep.
This is key, but capital is not only money, simplifying. That's too much simplifying. So access to capital in two senses. First one is definitely money. So the key point would be cost of capital, and companies in the long run would have a cheaper cost of capital if they do good things for the society, for the environment, and for the workers. And that's simply going to happen. It may be a matter of timing. Some people may fight against it, but it's simply going to happen. But the very important thing on top of that is the access to human capital. And we've heard before in previous panels how millennials think about this. And this is what is probably making the trend accelerate quite a lot. If you want to have talent, you would need to be a responsible company to access to that, both capital in terms of money, but in terms of human capital, which is even more important probably.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. In terms of actually younger generation, how they see it, from a venture capital perspective, what we have seen since the time I've been investing, but I've seen a lot of projects before, is a lot more projects coming in this space. I saw a company in the UK, they actually is a company that's selling electricity for the UK houses. You say it's the same that everybody does. But with a big component, with big difference. They say that 100% of the energy they sell is sustainable. It's coming from sustainable sources. And they buy that sustainable energy in the whole market, but they buy only 100% green energy. So whenever you contract that company, it's 100% green energy. I see the growth of that company over the last 2-3 years, and it's incredible. They're providing at a price that is pretty much the price of the market plus a little premium, but not too much. And customers want it. Customers are ready to pay for it, and customers are really willing to pay a little bit extra prime in order to have that. So there's a big change of mentality. I totally agree with you. But coming back to another question, so how real do you think this virtual circle is right now? So the circle economy, how real do you think it is? Because this is a term that has been going around for a while. The reality is environment keeps, climate change keeps happening. There is the agreements of Paris, the US backing out of there now. So how real do you think this, we're actually going to get there? How close do you think we are from getting there? Big question. Pierre?
A very big question. So I was here this morning with my family. I have 2 kids, 6 and 8 years old, and they really wanted to see Obama, right? And I was reminded that, no, we have a time, I mean, we're also on a timeline that's finite in terms of solving this, right? When you ask how real it is, well, we better make it real, because if we don't get this done, our children will not have the time to do that, right? Totally. No, we have 18 years, and our carbon budget will be exhausted, right? And as President Obama said, it makes quite a big difference for hundreds of millions of people, whether we have a sea level rise of 3 feet, or whether you have to get up and
exactly. That's 6 feet.
get to
exactly.
6 feet, right?
Yep.
So, and in 18 years, my oldest son may be just out of college, but that's a little, and even if you start your first venture earlier than this, right, it's not enough, right? This is our generation that has to make it real.
Totally agree.
I think there are lots of data that reflect that this looks real. You only know when you're in a turning point, when it's behind you. So turning points are difficult to identify, but I think they're important data. Regarding how the society is concerned about this stuff and how serious they're taking, I don't have a very serious source, but tweets, which are quite fashionable, are 19 times more tweets about ESG stuff than 5 years ago, which is how it may reflect something, but there's more important things. Information was key for this. In their last quarter of 2017, almost half of the Standard & Poor's 500 companies reported ESG factors when they reported their earnings. Every single big investment bank is having their own research departments about responsible investments. So it is getting real, but this needs to be reflected. I mean, activism is again very real. Over 40% of the requirements from activist investors in 2017 were ESG related.
Right.
But then there's the big proof of stake, which is where money is flowing. And in terms of money flows, Goldman Sachs issued a report a couple of months ago and measuring several of these things. And there were inflows in ETFs and funds directly applying ESG investments for over $1 trillion. This reflects 10% growth in year 16 and almost 30% growth in 17. But in terms of flows, not in terms of stock, the growth of the flows to these investments was 250% in year 17. So basis is still small. There's still a lot to do, but we're facing a tipping point.
And what you think about the younger generation? Do you think they are more willing to make the step, more willing to make the sacrifice in order to bring us there? Or do you think that's still more or less the same that it was before? Just a matter of you need to be competitive enough. They are not willing to pay a little bit extra or sacrifice some stuff in order to get to that. So, Theo, you want to start?
For me, I think that young generation is changing something, but I would not say sacrificing, but they measure things in a different manner. And the big change of mentality, it's probably, it may be relating to environment or whatever, but the big real change of it, in my opinion, is they don't desire owning any stuff. That changes quite a lot, and that's very much related to the circular economy, not owning things, but using them and keeping others use them too. So I think that's a big change of mentality, and that's reflected again in what do they require for their employer and how they put quality of life. It was said before again, but once we have our main needs covered, you can think in other stuff. Probably more important in the long run.
And I would argue today it's no longer a question of sacrifice if you really go for the circular or the green economy, right? I think what we've seen in investment portfolios that are ESG related or that focus on this commodity, it's doing at least as well as a conventional one that does not apply those filters. And you could argue that in the medium term it will definitely protect you more against risks, because in the conventional one, without applying those filters, there's a lot of downside risks, right? Stranded assets. Now you're looking at regulatory action that may be forthcoming here in Europe that will punish brown exposures that banks may have or institutional investors may have. So that these are considerations you have to factor in, right? But I don't think that today it's any more a sacrifice, right? Whether you buy a green bond or a conventional bond, right? The performance is actually similar, and on certain aspects, the green bonds occasionally outperforms the conventional ones.
And that's a big factor. Just as an example of what we're talking about, younger generations, there is one entrepreneur here, I think Iker Marqueda, are you around here? There you go. So he's an amazing example because this guy has built what is called Barrio La Penita. It's a 100% sustainable neighborhood in Valencia. It's an amazing project. He didn't have to do it. He had a very successful startup. He sold it, and now he has gone into this and created a 100% sustainable neighborhood in Valencia. So congratulations for that, Iker. Really cool project. Coming back to the returns, and so do you think the returns in this investments in this green economy, is it enough to attract enough capital to do what we need to do over the next years? Or do we still need incentives from governments in order to get us where we need to get? Because we talk about numbers. All the panelists before talk about numbers. The numbers in order to get us there are huge. We need to make a huge investment if we want to actually, instead of having the sea race to here, to make it here, the investment is going to be huge. And you say 50% of the emerging market assets from the banks will need to be invested in projects related to this. It's a huge commitment. Do you think private companies can do that by themselves, or institutions can do that by themselves, or do we need the support from the governments? And if we need support from the governments, what can they do? So, Diego, you want to start?
I mean, definitely, there are lots of investment opportunities related to this circular economy, and you definitely can do very profitable projects, but governments would probably have, a lot to say to really do the transition to the circular economy. That's a long-term issue, and private money would definitely be very much interested in going to there for for profit interest, but not only, but would probably have a bit of a lack of that long-term horizon. So that's where you need to match. And probably just regulation can help quite a bit to mix those different horizons.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to a more differentiated views, right? There's certainly areas and opportunities you don't need any government or policy support or concessional financing and so on, because it's just the cheaper option that is green, right? You can go for that. But there's an interplay of both government and private sector, right? That we heard upon from much more competent speakers than myself about how policymakers have to set signals and be predictable going forward, right? And I think that predictability about what matters in the future, right? That sustainability matters, that there's a premium to, or there's a discount to brown or non-sustainable actions. I think that's important, right? We heard about carbon taxes, we heard about a regulatory action that may impact capital charges and so on. So I think you definitely, I don't think it's an either-or question, right? I think you do need both, and I think in particular when it comes to the financial sector, given that it's such a highly regulated industry, right? If you go out there as a bank alone and you leave the policy makers in the dust or your regulator, they may not understand what you're doing, that can be a little uncomfortable, right? And so you want to kind of bring them along and make sure there's that interaction and alignment.